Madam Chair, we're ready. Good. Have at it.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. My name is Byron Flagg. I've been asked by the city attorney's office in the city to come and give you all a orientation to serving on the Planning and Zoning Board. I understand some of you have been newly appointed to the board. And anytime any city planning and zoning board gets new members, it's always a good time to have orientation about what your role is and what where your authority comes from in the city's Code of Ordinances and what your job is. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm a Florida land use and environmental attorney. I'm based in Gainesville. I've done work with the city attorney here, Mr. Coberline. I've done work with him at different municipalities in North Florida. I'm originally from Gainesville. I've worked, as you all know a little bit already about me, I'm a former assistant state attorney. I have worked for myself. I've worked for private law firms. I've worked for government agencies, St. Johns River Water Management District. And so currently what I do now is I have my own practice, but I also work very closely with Alachua Conservation Trust on conservation land projects in Alachua County. So what you have before you is a something that we put together that we're calling a quick reference guide. This is something that you all can hang on to and keep with you to help you understand what your basic responsibilities are. And we'll go through this and you all can ask me questions at the end. You can ask me questions along the way if you have a compelling need to ask something. I also have a short PowerPoint presentation at the end that maybe we can pull it up and we can show you some examples of how people in different cities have gotten into some hot water with some of the issues we'll be talking about. Let me ask real quick of the members here tonight, who here has either served as an elected member of an elected body or have you served on an appointed body before? Anyone besides the Planning and Zoning Board? So you all are brand new to public service on an appointed board?
The two people on the right, the chair and the vice chair, are currently serving members. They've been on the Planning and Zoning Board for a while. This is a refresher for them.
Okay.
The two gentlemen sitting over on the left side are our new appointees. I think this is a first for them, or at least in the city of Lake City.
Okay.
We wanted to make sure that we give them a decent orientation as to roles, responsibilities, and the things that you're going to cover. I think you've done a great job with them.
Okay, great. It's always, yes, ma'am.
I have 7 volunteer boards.
Okay, great, excellent. And the reason I'm asking is just to kind of get an understanding of your experience in running meetings or participating in meetings where you're serving in a public capacity.
I'd have to check the records, but I've been on this board 11 years now.
I think so.
Okay, that's a long time. I've known a lot of people that serve on planning and zoning boards, and most people do not, for whatever reason, choose to stay on that long. But it is definitely a public service, long hours, meetings, as you all already know. There's lots of homework before every meeting, and one of the things that I think makes the best board members of any appointed board is engagement and involvement and being willing to do the homework, before the meeting begins, looking at the agenda that staff puts together and looking at all the material that the staff puts together and reading through everything that the petitioner or an applicant puts together. And taking all that into consideration before the meeting. And that way, you're able to make the best decision you can. It's a thoughtful decision. So looking at your quick reference packet, we have on on page 3 there, the people involved with the Planning and Zoning Board. So you all already know most of that. There's a chair of the board. There's a vice chair of the board. You all will periodically rotate and elect among yourselves who serves as chair or the vice chair. There should be a secretary of the Planning and Zoning Board who keeps minutes of the meeting. Depending on the staff you have working with you, the staff might help you reduce your notes of your meetings to typewritten form. And those meetings, one of the things we'll learn about is public meetings, in addition to being recorded, minutes need to be taken. And so those minutes are very important because they document the action, the deliberation, and the action of the board. So that's a legal requirement. The city clerk, you all of course know, the city clerk plays an important role in meetings. Whenever someone is submitting documents to you to review, they need to submit those to the city clerk, and the city clerk will enter those into the record so that whatever they provide attaches to the agenda item. Staff will receive it and make sure that you all know if someone has submitted something regarding an agenda item. The city manager, of course, is there to help manage and advise and help the proceeding move along. And I believe, let's see, under the City Land Development Code, city manager acts as the land development administrator. Is that right? And we'll talk about that. Do you know what the role of the land administrator is yet? You learned that? Okay, we'll get to that. Another person involved with city planning and zoning board, of course, is the city attorney, or city attorney's designee, which in this case is tonight is me. Now, the city attorney will advise you on the status of the law or what the code says, or procedure. But something that's very important for you to understand, and this happens a lot in cities all over the state, where a board will look to the city attorney that's there and say, well, how should we decide this? What should we do? The city attorney's role is never to tell you what to do, because you're appointed by the city commission. City commission is elected by the citizens, the voters. So think about it that way. Why should the city attorney all of a sudden have the ability to tell you what to do? Your decision comes from the vote of the people by way of being appointed to the city commission. So whereas the city attorney will tell you, you may hear this a lot. The code says this, the law says this, this is what the comprehensive plan says, this is the status of things, this ordinance was adopted on this date, or this ordinance was amended, so such and such date. And ladies and gentlemen of the Planning and Zoning Board, you must make your own decision based on the information that's been provided to you, and you must decide whether or not it meets the conditions and requirements of the land development code. And so that's where your homework comes in. That's where you will need to familiarize yourself and read the code and learn along with city staff about those things. So that's something to remember. The city attorney is not there to tell you how to vote. They're there to help guide you through information that you need to make the decision that you need to make. Petitioner or applicant, Mr. Vice Chair, you used the word petitioner already in some of our conversations. So a petitioner, sometimes also known as an applicant, it means the same thing, but different cities use different terms. So if, say for instance, for hypothetically speaking, say I'm a homeowner in the city of Lake City, and I want to ask the Planning and Zoning Board to approve a zoning change of my property, I'm going to file a petition with the correct office at the city, and that's going to get added onto an agenda. And so my request comes before you as a petition and or an application. And so that's how it gets placed onto an agenda. And your agendas have to be publicly noticed ahead of time so that all the public knows we have government body, the Planning and Zoning Board, is officially meeting and taking action on something. What is it? Well, it tells us what it is in the agenda. And so, so that's what the term petitioner and applicant, that's what we refer to as someone coming before the planning board asking for some kind of action. You'll also hear the term sometimes an interested party or an aggrieved party. That's someone who's not a petitioner or an applicant asking you for something, to approve something. An interested or aggrieved party is someone who is perhaps a neighbor. So go back to my example. Maybe my neighbor finds out that I'm coming before you to ask for a zoning change. And for some reason, my neighbor is either concerned about something I'm requesting and maybe wants some modification, or maybe they're just against it for some reason. And they have a right to come talk to the Planning and Zoning Board and say, well, I'm against it, and I think you shouldn't approve it. Here's why. So you have petitioner applicant coming before you to request something that is based on the code or the zoning code. And then you have an interested or aggrieved party who's there because they want to tell you something about an agenda item or oppose something. And then, of course, sometimes the court reporter, there might be a court reporter here occasionally. If there's a court reporter here, it's probably because you're having a quasi-judicial hearing or a quasi-judicial proceeding. And we're gonna learn more about that shortly. But if you have a petitioner asking you for something and there's an aggrieved party who's opposing what the petitioner is requesting, it's very possible that the aggrieved party or the interested party who's opposing it is going to bring a court reporter. And the reason they're bringing a court reporter, even though your whole meeting is already being recorded, is because they want a court reporter to reduce everything to a transcript in case for some reason the aggrieved party is worried you might make a mistake or make a decision that's not in conformance with the land development code. And so they'll want to appeal. And so if they're going to appeal, they need to have the deliberations in your decision reduced to a transcript so that when they appeal it, it's in a form that courts will accept. So if you see a court reporter, I would say be on your best behavior.
The camera pretty much keeps us on.
That's right. And really, I mean, that's, one important reason why meetings are public. Any questions about that? Just the basic roles of people you'll see and the roles of people that are around. Okay. So on page 4 of our little quick reference packet, there's a page there explaining the role of the City Planning and Zoning Board. And you don't need to read through that. You can read through that, over coffee this weekend. But this is real simple. Just whenever you need a moment to figure out, what is my role? What are we doing as a Planning and Zoning Board? This little page helps you remember this is the big picture. Your job is, as a Planning and Zoning Board, you do a couple of different things. One thing is sometimes the City Commission will say, the City Council, in Lake City we call it the City Council. Sometimes City Council might say, you know what, here's an issue we've got going on in the city where we really would like the Planning and Zoning Board to study this and give us a recommendation. So maybe they come up with some kind of land use study, and they want to look at how many bus stops, public bus stops or public transportation stops do we have within the city limits? Is it good enough? Are there areas that should be looked at for more services? And let's have staff work on that kind of an issue and come up with a report, and let's have the Planning and Zoning Board talk about it and solicit public input at a workshop or a meeting. So that could be, it's kind of a planning issue, transportation planning issue. And that kind of role also falls under your responsibility. So, those tasks might come to you from the city council. And sometimes maybe the city manager might be in discussions with the city council, and, staff might say, hey, we have a good planning and zoning board. This might be something that you could have them discuss and roundtable, come back to you, city council, have the planning and zoning board come back to you with a recommendation or some findings. So that's an example of something that you might do, which is more along the lines of policy or a broader planning issue for the city. But then there are, I would say more common probably are these requests you're going to get from petitioners. Someone needs something specifically changed or done or accomplished under the code, under the land use code, under the zoning code. And so they're going to submit an application or a petition to the city planning and zoning department, and it will work its way through the approval process as defined in the land development code. And if there's a part of the code that says, well, what they're asking for needs to go to the planning and zoning board for approval, then it will get put on an agenda, and then you will be given a presentation by city staff about what the matter is, and that's just a black and white. Here's the facts. Petitioner has made this request, and here's what they've provided us. And usually, city staff is going to say our recommendation is, to approve it because it meets the code. Is that right, Mr. City Manager? Usually provide a recommendation, and then you will hear from the petitioner who's asking for it, and then you'll hear from anyone else who's interested. And at these meetings, public is allowed to provide input, and those types of hearings are what we call quasi-judicial. And you're going to keep hearing this from me, quasi-judicial, because it's a different type of meeting. So when you go back to the transportation planning policy type discussion I'm talking about, that's a more broad general discussion. Public can have input as well, it has a right to provide input, but there's not going to be testimony between interested parties. Quasi-judicial hearing is kind of similar to a court case. You are all like a panel of judges. That's why it's called quasi-judicial, because you'll end up actually making a legal decision, or a decision that has legal ramifications for a property owner. That's why we call it quasi-judicial. So those are the basic roles that the Planning and Zoning Board has. So from a bird's eye view, that's what you're going to be doing. From there, you're going to get way down into the details of the code. How far can a fence be from a property line? What are the setbacks for residential properties? You're going to get into all of that kind of stuff. And it's important to remember that when we're talking, you all know, and because you own property or you rent property that is important to you, it's your home. And so people are very emotional about these things. So it's important to remember that, figure out, especially the chair, figure out how to run a meeting and to make sure that people feel like they have been able to provide input and are heard. And you can't control whatever people do all the time, but when people have an opportunity to be heard and feel like they've been heard, usually that is what they want. Can't please everybody with decisions, especially when we have a law that determines what our decisions need to be. All right. Any questions about that?
I got a question. So, say we're in a meeting and then we have to go by what laws are relevant to, say, setbacks. If we're not familiar with that, then we have who to intervene and give us that information, the attorney or some other body that is gonna be here, well, they'll say, well, the setback is such and such for that will be in our
So I would say,
documents beforehand, so we can read up on that.
yes, I would say,
Have you gotten your copy of the LDRs yet?
No.
You'll be presented with a 3-ring binder.
You have
Has all that
requested.
in it. And when we have a meeting, there'll be a copy in this room if we ever need to reference it.
Okay.
right,
But I mean, nobody can possibly remember and know everything that's in there.
that's right.
So I guess,
And I would say that 2 answers. Well, yes, you want to go ahead and answer that?
And usually, when the information is given to us to review, someone on staff who is specializing in that has already reviewed it, and we have their recommendation in front of us that it does meet the specific code.
okay, so like he was saying previously, so that would be helpful.
And we can request a copy of the LDR.
You should be given,
Will be issued one.
you
Good.
should be given a copy, yes.
Yeah,
But the
And-
way that the petitions are usually structured, the person that serves as our administrative assistant here, that's usually taking the minutes, usually the person that reports directly to the Director of Growth Management, formerly Beverly, but she's moved on.
We have a new man, very nice.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
Excellent.
He's looking at our roof.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
In that petition, if the petitioner has not already filled it out in the narrative portion that they have to fill out saying we are requesting a reduction from the 13-foot setback to a 7-foot setback for this particular project. If the petitioner has not already put that in, our administrative assistant will have that in our packages that get sent to us prior to the meetings.
So when you have a meeting, do you usually approve or disapprove, or do you sometimes say we need more time and then we'll get back with you on it?
All of the
All
above.
of the above.
All the above. So there's not like a standard, I mean, if it's simple, you'd probably be like, yeah, the recommendation, it's more law approved, that's fine. But if it's something convoluted.
You'll know when it's going to be contentious because all these seats will be full.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And then some days when you walk in and there's only 4 or 5 people sitting in the seats, you know it's going to be non-contentious.
We also have what we call a consent agenda. So if it's very, very routine, then it's given to us all in a lump and says, this is nothing to look at here. This is just, they have to file this request. It meets all of the rules. It's very small monetarily. It's not significant. And then we just go down that list very quickly. But in advance, you're given your packet in advance of the meeting. So a week in advance of the meeting. I personally ride the agenda. I drive the agenda.
Yep.
And,
We'll visit every single property.
and look at every property.
Oh,
And look at every
seriously?
property. We're given all of the information about it, look at the information, and the photographs. I could live next door to those photographs sometimes and I won't recognize the house.
Yeah.
I physically go to the address and look at it.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if they're wanting to do something specific,
Correct.
then you'll drive over there and say, okay, and you can put what they wrote down as
Correct.
something in your mind, so when they
Correct.
come, you already know about it.
Which to have all of us riding around looking, is it okay for us to get together 1 or 2 and go look together?
well, so we're going to talk about what constitutes a public meeting.
Right.
And just to answer that real quick, if 2 or more people of the same appointed board happen to meet and talk about an issue that's going to come before them, that probably, the way I just described
So
it.
we all have to drive individually.
Yeah, I mean, you are
Yeah.
doing one of the no-nos, which is, if you were to do that, I know you haven't done that, but if you were to say, hey, let's say we're in City of Gainesville and Joe and Bill on the Planning and Zoning Board down there say, hey, let's get together and, we're friends and, but before we go, on our biking trip, let's go look at that property that's going to be on the agenda tomorrow night and talk about it. Well, they're conducting business of the board outside the sunshine. And that's a no-no. We're supposed to be always meeting at a publicly noticed meeting so that the public has an opportunity to hear the deliberations and to ask questions and also to be heard. So you can, with things that come up on the agenda, you can, if there's a historic building that's something is changing about it or there's a request about it, you can go and look at that building. You can go to a site and look at it. You can ask staff about it. You just can't talk to your fellow planning and zoning board members about something that you're going to be voting on.
As long as it is not an agenda item or due to become an agenda item,
Right.
we could get together and do a workshop.
A workshop is essentially a public meeting, but you don't want to conduct any kind of business regarding private property at a workshop. A workshop is like what we're doing now, general discussion.
And we have 2 historic areas here in Lake City. Is it okay if we get together to familiarize ourselves with the boundaries and the buildings within those areas? Not talking about any change, not talking about anything else, but to familiarize ourselves, because we also sit as a historic board.
Right, and we'll talk about that too.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, on your own, certainly.
Individually, I can do it.
Right. If you want to talk amongst yourselves about anything, you really need to schedule a meeting and have it advertised. That really is the best, safest thing to do so that you don't accidentally run afoul of the requirements of having of operating in the sunshine, as we say.
I think I understand what you're saying, just like you're instructing us in this orientation. Like, I'm not familiar with the boundaries.
Correct.
I don't know where I'm assuming
We
that
need
historic
to
is,
get out there.
we're in it right now.
Sure.
And there's probably somewhere over on the lake.
We can get you handouts. Those are on file with the U.S. Department of Interior and the Florida Master Site file.
And staff you can say, hey, staff, could you give us a present? One of the things that I'm about to explain to you is you also serve as members of the Historic Preservation Agency. You have 3 hats. You don't know that, but you have 3 hats when you get appointed to the planning.
We also have these.
But
it's awfully hard.
That looks a little cartoonish.
well, yeah, and so you can ask staff for help in understanding what's the historic. What are the boundaries of our historic areas? What are the properties that are located in the historic areas? And can we schedule a walk around tour? You can do that, but if it's the board together, you have to make it a noticed advertised meeting. That's what you got to do. Remember, 2 or more. So, I mean, I have examples in this PowerPoint that we can look at, real life examples where, in small towns, Betty and Sarah see each other at church, or they see each other wherever. And it's common to potentially, and maybe they serve on the same board, but you just can't talk about something that is coming before you because it's 2 or more people at the same board conducting business outside sunshine. You just don't want to do that. And same thing with communicating. Even if you're not meeting, if you don't accidentally meet someplace, but texting. If you're texting each other, don't do that. Don't call each other, don't text each other, don't email each other about business that's before the board because you're still conducting, if you were to do that. I'm saying
We now have where we can email on the city servers. So if it's about business, if it's about city, anything, instead of me just.
So who's the liaison?
We will.
Who's our liaison then, if we have a question before we meet?
It would be the staff person that's assigned to sit with the planning and zoning board or whoever is going to be.
Yeah.
We're allowed to contact them, I guess, right?
Of course.
Okay.
And how long is it until we're gonna have a new director of growth management?
Undetermined at this time. We're doing interviews this week for planning and zoning technician. And in the interim, I'll be your point of contact. So until we fill the position of growth management director, the city manager will be your contact, your point person for that. And then when we get a planning and zoning tech on, we'll do that. We'll provide secretarial duties for you, take minutes for you when you have official meetings, and if you have questions, because you shouldn't talk to each other, you can call about those applications and speak to me.
All right, well, let me keep on going here, and so we can get to more questions, and I can just field those for you. So on page 5, I've included some excerpts from the Code of Ordinances. This is Article 3 of the city's Code of Ordinances, not the Land Development Code. The Code of Ordinances is different from the Land Development Code. The Land Development Code you should think of as an element or a piece of the Code of Ordinances. The Code of Ordinances is the entire set of laws that the city uses to govern itself. So Article 3 of the city's Code of Ordinances is what defines the planning and zoning board. So you have that right here. So I pulled that out so that you don't have to go through all the entire code, so that you can see, all right, here's what we are. Here's how we were created. Here's our definitions. And here's our basic rules. And here's our basic, if you look at the bottom in page 5, section 2-86, powers and duties. So that, you should definitely read through that when you have an opportunity, because that tells you what specifically your role is. I've summarized it already for you, but that is specifically what you as a board are authorized to do and what your responsibilities are acting as an appointed board. So as you see, there are, the code says that the planning and zoning board should be comprised of 7 members and 4 members. You need 4 members to make a quorum. So there needs to always be 4 members in order to conduct any business. And so anyway, we've got, just as I mentioned before, rules of procedure, meetings, record keeping, your powers and duties, when a hearing may be required. And so sometimes you will hear the planning and zoning board referred to as the land planning agency. And so, like I mentioned before, the idea of you reviewing things the city council wants you to review, like transportation planning issues, more of a policy perspective. As a land planning agency, you will review things like changes to the comprehensive plan or proposed changes to ordinances. Maybe sometimes the city council, one of the city council members says, I'd like to change an ordinance that we have regarding setbacks on something. And so, but that city council member says, but I want to draft it up, and first I'd like it to go to the planning and zoning board for discussion. And so you as the land planning agency will hear that item and talk about it from a land planning policy perspective. And then when you vote, you're making a recommendation. You may recommend to the city council, go ahead, we agree this would be a good change to the city code. Or you may say, we think this is not a good change, don't do it. This is our recommendation. Or you may say, it's not a bad idea, we recommend changes, and here are our changes. So that's your role as the land planning agency from a policy type perspective. So remember, you as the planning and zoning board are also called the land planning agency when you are reading the code or the land development code. So if you look at, our page numbers are messed up.
Was that our third hat?
Not yet. You're still wearing your first hat. Planning and Zoning Board / Land Planning Agency. Just hat number
Under
one.
that umbrella.
That's hat number one.
Gotcha.
So the land development regulations that you all just pulled up, those are incorporated under Chapter 74 of the Code of Ordinances. And so what I've done there on one of the following pages, I'm sorry my page numbers got completely out of whack. I don't know how that happened. But you'll see Chapter 74 planning, and it explains the city's land development regulations are adopted by reference, incorporated by reference into the code. And if you go to that link and pull it up, that's the North Florida Regional Planning Council. They provide planning services to the city. And so they're maintaining the entire record of the land development regulations, including when they change all the time. And so when you pull this up, you'll see the history of the changes to the land development regulations on the front page. It's always important to make sure you're always looking at the most current version of the land development regulations and not something from 10 years ago, because that could be outdated law. So, but don't worry about that. Just be aware of that issue in your staff, or ask your city attorney to make sure you have the right updated version.
And what is the most current revision that's available from Planning Council? Because we've experienced some situations in the past where the material Planning Council has been over a year out of date.
Right.
And we've been called on it by petitioners or by
Right.
members of council. Why are you using out-of-date materials? Well, it's what we have.
Well, and that's something that city attorney, that's a question for the city attorney whenever that comes up, and working with city staff to make sure that what is being applied by city staff is correct and the latest version of what's been adopted by the city council. And so my understanding is that this link that's in here is the current version, because in preparation for today, I wanted to make sure that I was doing just that. And so this is the updated version. And then if you see my yellow highlights under Article 3 Administrative Mechanism, there has been a recent change to some of these ordinances that we're talking about, some of the law that we're talking about, and it has not yet been codified into that version that's accessible at that link. And so that's what I've done, is highlighted it in yellow, and I've underlined the amendment and showing you what was deleted. And anytime you're looking at any kind of legislation, you're gonna see this when a proposed ordinance comes before you for review. Words that are underlined are the proposed additions, and words that are stricken are the proposed deletions. So if you're looking at here's this highlighted.
Look in your other packet, the one that's marked quick guide, or I'm sorry, quick reference guide. You're looking at just the straight up one. Go in, no, not that packet. That one on the bottom.
This one?
Yeah, if you move to your second page, number 3, that one should have highlights for you.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that's just an example of legislative, what it looks like when an ordinance is being amended, parts are being amended to add or delete. If it's something being proposed to be added in, it's underlined. If it's proposed to be deleted, it's stricken. That way you can see what all the changes are. But the point of this is to show you that Article 3, Administrative Mechanisms, under the Land Development Code, where it talks about what the planning and zoning board's organization and duties are, it was recently amended so that the term of office shall be 4 years. So you will be serving 4 years. And if we have new members, it explains how the terms will be staggered. That way it's not always 4 years, back to back, because then you have a whole new planning and zoning board changing at once. With staggered terms, you have people coming and going, and that helps you have some institutional knowledge and some leadership. So these are the legal sources in the code and in the land development regulations as to what the planning and zoning board's responsibilities are. So you can read those at your own leisure. I put those in there just so that you know what your role is.
I have a question regarding 3.1.2.4, at the bottom of page 4. Disqualification of members.
Yes.
This has come up in the past, individuals accusing certain members of this board that happen to live within the boundaries of the historic district. They recommended that just because we live in the district, we should recuse ourselves from any single petition that comes up regarding that district. Is that overkill in your opinion?
Well, I don't know enough to be able to give you an opinion. However, what you're talking about is really a conflict of interest. And what this means, this disqualification, we'll talk about conflicts of interest here, but disqualification of members. If any member of this is 3.1.2.4, like you said, if any member of the planning and zoning board shall find that his or her private or personal interests are involved in a matter coming before the board, he or she shall disqualify himself or herself from all participation in that case. It's just for that one agenda item. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, I live in the historic preservation area in my city, in Gainesville. And I'm serving on the Historic Preservation Board, Planning and Zoning Board in Gainesville. And I want to renovate my historic house. And I need to put in new windows. And but the type of new windows I want to put in has to be approved by the board. Would it make sense and be right if I was to be sitting on the board and also voting on something that benefits my own house?
No, and I understand that scenario.
That's the easy one, right? That's a no-brainer. Let's just extrapolate that and say, suppose there's, a historic project. Suppose you're in a city where there's a historic hotel and an investor is going to put in a lot of money into it, and it's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. Everyone's excited about it. Generating, it might spin off other businesses. It might increase property values in the surrounding area. And if you happen to you sit on the board that's going to approve this hotel renovation project, historic renovation project. And if you own a property in the near vicinity that you have information that my value of my property is probably going to benefit. If you find yourself starting to ask yourself, do I have a conflict of interest here? Am I fully aware that I am probably going to benefit in some way by voting one way or the other on this agenda item? If you realize that you do, you probably should disqualify yourself from voting on that matter. If you are, now, when it comes to conflicts of interest, the city attorney cannot advise any one board member whether they have a conflict or not. All the city attorney can do is say, here's what the law is on voting conflicts. You have to decide for yourself whether you have one or not. And in big cases, in big matters in big cities where there's lots of money involved, sometimes city commissioners or board members will actually go seek their own legal counsel to decide whether or not they should disqualify themselves or not. If it's a close call sometimes. The best practice is to just say, you know what, I don't think I would benefit in any way. It seems remote. It seems, abstract. But if there's a question, maybe I just will sit this one out. And when we talk about conflicts of interest, when you know for sure that you have a conflict of interest, you should state it on the record and say, I've, Planning and Zoning Board, I need to state that I have a conflict here. I happen to own a house or property that I know for sure will probably benefit if this is approved. And so I'm disqualifying myself from voting on this matter. I'm going to sit back and not take any action. And really, since we're talking abstractly, I think best practices are if you start finding yourself thinking about it, it's probably do the safest thing you can do and go ahead and just recuse yourself.
The specific incident that prompted this question, though, there was a aggrieved or interested party that had made comment to us at a meeting while we were in session, claiming that all individuals of the board that lived in the historic district shouldn't be allowed to vote on something that occurs in one particular corner of said district. In your reading of this, even though, obviously if it's something right next door to me, if it's something that I can go on my front porch and I can turn left or turn right and I can see, I've recused myself on those issues a number of times. But when an aggrieved member of the public says, well, it's not fair, you live in the district. And I've said, well, I cannot see your petitioned property from mine. I have no skin in the game. Well, still, you have to recuse yourself. I don't see it that way.
Right.
Now, from a legal standpoint, I don't stand to benefit from that. I don't stand to suffer loss from that. But just being that some of us live in the district, is that automatic recusal if there's anything that comes up?
Not necessarily. And like I say, we'll talk about voting conflicts here in a minute. And really, what you're talking about is a voting conflict. The question is not, should I disqualify myself? The question that you're really asking is,
Okay.
do I have a voting conflict here? And I think that's what the person in the public that you're referring to, they feel like there is a voting conflict for some reason, that maybe they can articulate it, maybe they can't. The decision is up to you when that kind of situation arises. And remember, the city attorney can't advise you whether you have a voting conflict or not, because the city attorney isn't sitting there with you every day, every moment of the day, knowing what's going on in your mind, what your affairs are. The city attorney's role is to represent the board as a whole, not any of you individually. And so what we'll do here is look at the law of voting conflicts, and that will help ground you in that. And there's a lot of resources that we can point to you for your reading later that get into the very detailed situations of voting conflicts. And we've got some real life examples to show you that. But think about every city council member lives within the city limits. They have to. You, by virtue of being appointed on this board, you have to live within the city limits. It's a requirement. So you're always going to be voting on some matter within the city limits. So just because you live within the city limits or in a certain zoning district doesn't automatically mean you're disqualified, because it doesn't automatically mean you have a voting conflict.
And that was the rationale and the grounds that we had used to not recuse ourselves, what you just iterated right there.
And there's case law and attorney general opinions with the state of Florida on that point, because people bring that point up. But let me keep going here. So let's talk about hat number 2 and hat number 3 that you wear. Okay, so if you take a look at it's page 6. Unfortunately, it's page 6 times 2. Sorry about my page numbers. I'll get that fixed and resend it to you. But page 6 at the top, it says members of the Planning and Zoning Board also serve as member of the city's Board of Adjustment and the city's Historic Preservation Agency. You see that page? So what I've done is, again, just taking out the pieces of the code, so you don't have to read through the whole code, and there it is. So section 3.2, Board of Adjustment. It's 3.2.1.1, establishment. A Board of Adjustment is hereby established by the city. And if you go down to the second paragraph under 3.2.1.2, the City Council may, by resolution, designate members of the Board of Adjustment to perform the functions of the Planning and Zoning Board. If the council so elects, which they have, the terms of office of members of the Planning and Zoning Board shall run concurrently with said members' term of office on the Board of Adjustment. So your hat number 2 is you are serving as the Board of Adjustment. And so the difference between the Planning and Zoning Board and the Board of Adjustment is if you just look at 3.2.2.1, Board of Adjustment, powers and duties, administrative review. So when you're wearing your Board of Adjustment hat, you're acting in the capacity of administrative reviewing some kind of decision that the city staff has made. So the Board of Adjustment shall have the power to hear and decide appeals when it is alleged that there is error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by the Land Development Regulation Administrator. So that would be city manager or someone under the city manager, or the planning director when you all get one. If they made a decision about something that doesn't necessarily need to be approved by you, if the person who is affected by that decision says, well, I disagree with your decision, I want to appeal it, the route of appealing is to the Board of Adjustment. And so also the Board of Adjustment will hear special exceptions, variances from the code, special exceptions, and we don't have time to get into those tonight. Those could be a topic all by themselves.
And that's 95% of what
Yeah.
we usually hear is
Right.
as the BOA.
And we can get into that on another evening, but special exceptions are basically things in the code that say if someone wants to do this with their land, they need to go before the Board of Adjustment to seek a special exception. And you all have a lot of leeway in that role to say, well, we'll allow it. However, we think there should be certain conditions placed on that use. So you can have 25 chickens instead of the required 12, but you gotta make sure you have a fence so the neighbors aren't bothered. It's things like that. That's a real simple example. I don't know how many chickens are allowed under the code.
And in RSF3,
Okay.
chickens.
There you go. So, and then variances are when someone comes before the Board of Adjustment seeking a variance away from the strict requirements of the code. So like for
My shed's gonna be 5 feet from the property line, not the
Right.
10 required.
setback, right?
Yeah.
And so, right. So, and by the way, setbacks, the reason why setbacks are part of the code is for fire, historically, fire and safety reasons, not just space between your neighbor. The reason is if one building caught on fire, there's space between the next building, so you don't have an entire town burning down at once. That's just a little trivia for you. Okay, so hat number 3, and it's 5 o'clock already. So, all right, are you bored? You want to keep going?
No, keep going.
All right, so hat number 3, so you have hat number 1, Planning and Zoning Board. Hat number 2, Board of Adjustment, and then hat number 3, Historic Preservation Agency. It's a whole other board in and of itself. And if you look at the next page, page 7, you see Article 10, historics. This is Article 10 from the Land Development Code. Historic Sites and Structures Preservation Regulations, Section 10.1, Planning and Zoning Board designated as the Historic Preservation Agency. So there you are. So you also serve in that role. And then this isn't the whole section on the historic preservation, but it is just the bare bones so you can see that's your role and what your powers and duties there are.
And they're under section 10.3 powers and duties. Generally speaking, for our newest members, item 3 and item 4 under that section are going to be 95% of what we do as the HPA. Most notably, item 3, regulating alterations, demolitions, relocations, or new construction to designated property. And we'll get you those maps showing where the designated and jurisdictional limits of the two districts are.
Interesting.
Yeah, good point. All right, well, let's get into some of the other things that we need to talk about tonight to make sure you can be off and running. We included a little section on running a planning and zoning board meeting. Obviously, you have an experienced chair and vice chair, and they're going to help you. But there's some information in here that you can read through. And also, we've got basic parliamentary procedure terms that will help you figure out how to take action when you want to do something on the board, whether you want to make a motion, whether you want to ask questions. I'm going to bypass that and get to some other more important things in the interest of time. But that's in there for you.
This being a smaller board, do we have the option of limited discussion prior to a motion?
Well, first of all, you all need to adopt your own rules of procedure. And it can be, you can say, we're going to adopt Robert's.
Because we generally have a modified version of Roberts that's worked here
Right.
since I've been
Right.
on the board. And it ensures that everyone has a chance to speak. Every petitioner or interested party is allowed to speak.
Absolutely.
But it sort of separates the public hearing phase from the discussion amongst the board members and then the representative of the Department of Growth Management. It's a modified version. It's what we've adopted ever since I've been on here.
Right.
Do we have to be in strict compliance with Robert's rules, or can we just be
No,
in substantial?
our modified
compliance?
version must be put in writing and it must be adopted.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Everybody needs to know the rules of the game,
That's correct.
right?
Well, this is something that comes up in building code all the time.
Right.
Strict compliance versus substantial compliance.
Well, sure. Right. And the chair runs the meeting, and it's so important to have your rules that you agree upon to govern yourself, whether it's Robert's Rules of Order modified, modify it how you will. Get those published, and really a good practice is to have a copy of them available for everybody at the beginning of every meeting. You all will know them, you'll become experts, but let the public see that too, so that they know how to participate, and also so that they understand you're not just ignoring them. A lot of folks may not be experienced in coming before government. It's pretty intimidating to come before government, and they don't
A
understand.
lot of governments are experienced with government.
we are the government. So yeah, it's a really important thing, and
So in theory, annually, when the chair position changes, the very first meeting after the new chair is appointed or a chair carries over for the maximum of two terms before having to drop off for non-consecutive. At that first meeting, when the new chair is holding their inaugural meeting, we need to codify this and make sure a copy gets passed along in the minutes to City Clerk.
you can do that.
Okay.
I mean, if you don't do anything, I think if you establish rules, say 3 years ago, and a new chair comes on, you don't need to re-adopt what has been adopted in the past.
If the Planning and Zoning Board has adopted a modified version of Robert's Rules of Orders, then that stands until the board changes that, if they decide to go with something else. So once you've adopted it one time, you do need to have copies of it available so that if people come in, they can pick one up off the back shelf, and it needs to be in some written form in case people question.
Robert's rules are great, but to function in government, they need modifications.
That's right.
And there have been times that the people attending our meetings are snickering because we're trying to enforce Robert's rules strictly. And it's move, second, vote, move, second, vote, move, second, vote. It becomes so monotonous.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if you have dozens of interested or potentially aggrieved individuals that are going to want the chance to speak and possibly speak a second time.
Right.
One thing we've always made a hallmark of this board is if you want to be heard, you will be heard.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We've never been contentious enough where we've had to use that clock, fortunately.
Mhm.
Well, we're
and
pretty simple here,
and
but everyone that wants to speak gets to speak.
Right, and there, Florida Supreme Court case, I forget how many years ago, not long ago, just a few years ago, said every member of the public in a meeting gets a right to make a public statement.
Correct.
So some commissions operate where they will have, at the beginning of the agenda, they'll have open public comment. The public can come up and make a 3-minute comment on whatever they want. Doesn't have to be on the agenda. Then they'll start their meeting, follow the agenda item, but on each agenda item, there should be an opportunity for public comment. So a modified Robert's Rules of Order could look like, all right, we're calling agenda item number 21, historic preservation demolition request. And staff, go ahead and give your presentation. Staff just explains it to you. This is what's happening. Property owner owns this historic property. They've made a request to do this. Here's what it is.
So the petitioner themselves would be speaking in that regard.
Well, the order ought to be let staff present first. Let staff present the item as it has come to them. Let them explain their review of it and their analysis of the request in terms of the code so that you're informed of staff's. Remember, staff is there to guide you. You're not supposed to be up there and figure this out all on your own. These folks are paid planning staff. They do the hard work of putting together the explanation of what's coming before you and what their recommendation is. And then you can ask questions through the chair. You always, it feels awkward, but when you don't go, hey, if I was, the staff person, you wouldn't say, hey, Mr. Flagg, I have a question. You'd say, Madam Chair, I have a question. And then the Madam Chair recognizes you, and then you ask for a question. And then the staff person would answer through the chair to you. Everything flows through the chair. It's old fashioned, but it's important to keep that decorum. And so after you ask questions, then there can be discussion, and then the petitioner gets an opportunity to come up and say, this is why I'm making this request, this is what I think. And then maybe there's an interested party or an aggrieved party. No, I disagree, this building is too important, it shouldn't be torn down, blah, 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 blah. Say what they're gonna say. And then at that point, you can entertain a motion, the chair would entertain a motion, and then someone would make a motion. Maybe it's seconded, maybe it's not. If it's seconded, then the order ought to be, okay, we have a motion on the floor, it's been seconded. Before we vote, is there any public comment? Always take public comment before you vote. Always do that. It doesn't make any sense to vote and then take public comment.
Is that the procedure you guys?
We close public comment.
Modified version.
We close public comment before we vote. Anybody. And if nobody comes forward, we close public comment and call the vote.
And we'll actually require that it be moved and seconded that we close public comment. And that'll usually take place. Now, we do things, like I said, modified version. Usually we'll request that the petitioner or the agent of the petitioner come to the podium first, explain what it is you'd like to accomplish this evening. We may have some clarification questions back and forth that get routed through the chair. Once everything's been addressed, the chair will dismiss the proponent or the petitioner.
Do you do that before the person comes
Before
up and
city staff.
explains everything?
Yeah, before city staff, we'll have the petitioner explain their petition.
Should we,
Then what we'll do is we'll usually follow up with public comment. Once no one else from the audience wishes to speak, the chair will call for a motion to close public hearing. Someone will make a motion, someone will second. That will close the public hearing portion of it. Then we'll have a city staffer come up and say, okay, how do all the city departments feel about this? And then we'll grill usually the director of growth management. That person will be at the podium and we'll have a back and forth with them or amongst ourselves. Once we're satisfied at that point, then we call for a motion on the petition.
You can't close public hearing and still have comment. That's the reason we close public comment.
hearing before
We
the
close
city staff.
public comment. We close public comment before we close public hearing.
But the city staffer isn't technically public.
This is a public hearing. Everything that goes on in here is a portion of the public hearing.
Right.
That's the reason with me, I close public comment. Does anyone have further comment? And I close public comment.
Right.
If we have further questions of staff before we close public comment, it's Mike that would answer those for us.
Sure.
Not a staffer from out there that we don't know, but Mike.
what's the benefit of doing it your way first, having the staffer tell us
Because-
what exactly is going on?
Right, because if you, in these public meetings, in the interest of time and efficiency and order, which leads to decorum and good decision-making, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're having a back and forth all the time.
Correct.
If you have someone who comes up and presents to you information or a petition or something that is maybe not really grounded in the law, and they're not that experienced in the code and what the code says, and they might be accidentally saying something that's incorrect. And then staff has to come up and say, actually,
So we get the correct version first. We get
Well,
the,
we have it in writing. We have it in writing in your packet, in your agenda packet. You have that in writing.
And if
What they have
the agenda
recommended.
is incomplete, we've tabled stuff
And-
for incomplete submissions.
Correct.
uh,
So we have that in writing, which we have reviewed individually beforehand. And I write out and look at the property also. So the first person called to the stand when we open that item is the petitioner. The petitioner gives us his side of the story. Is there anyone else who would like to make comment? Is there anyone else who would like to make comment? Do we have further questions? If we do, Mike is the person that we call on for those further questions.
Especially as it pertains to city departments.
Then
What
we,
does the fire department think about this? What does the police department think about this? Because all those recommendations will have gone to the director of growth
Correct.
management as part of their due diligence.
correct. So at that point, all public comment is closed. And we close to move the item and vote.
do you want to add anything?
No.
Okay, so, right, and that's a fine way to do it. There's nothing wrong with that. Running a meeting is always difficult, but you want to try to figure out how to avoid constant back and forth or you never end.
Correct.
Because if you just have back and forth, rebuttal, you'll just be there forever. So a lot of local governments that I've been in front of or worked with, for those reasons, they like to have agenda item is called agenda item number 21. And keep in mind that if the petitioner is submitting to you a petition to do something or approve something, they will have already had to work with city staff. It's not coming to you blind without city staff, never having looked at it. They will have had an interaction with city staff in some manner, and city staff would have told them, well, this is what the code says, this is what you're supposed to do. And just like the chair is saying, your agenda packet before the meeting it'll be an agenda, and each agenda item should have a summary, an analysis,
It
a
does.
copy of the petition from the petitioner,
What their opinion is,
and what their recommendation is.
recommendation is.
Right. And so the city staff is a neutral presenter. They don't have a dog in the fight one way or the other. They shouldn't. And so they're just saying, planning and zoning board, this is what the petitioners presented. Here's what they're asking for. We've looked at it. This is what the code says about this. Unfortunately, what they're asking for can't be approved because the code says X, Y, Z. And so our recommendation is to deny their petition. That's what staff might say. And it would be in writing, attached to the agenda in your packet for you to know beforehand, but you also hear that. And that's probably a quasi-judicial matter, which we still need to get to. And so it's really important on quasi-judicial matters that staff always has the opportunity to articulate the reasons for the recommendation they're giving, because when you make a motion to deny something or approve something, your discussion needs to be able to support that motion with competent, substantial evidence. And you need to be able to say, for the following reasons, I think we should approve this, or for the following reasons, I think we should deny this. We'll get to that in a second.
Not really on target, but you just said something way back in the olden days. I was taught you never make a motion to disapprove. You make a motion to vote, you call the vote, or you make a motion to approve. And then if they want to disapprove, they do. They
Well,
don't do that anymore.
I would say, that's a practice more than a, legal requirement. It's probably, just that sounds more like, a local custom of,
Maybe being a female from the South, that's the way we handle it.
it sounds very polite. All right, so let's talk about government and the sunshine law real quick. I've kind of mentioned to you all before about, and this ties into seeing each other at the restaurant, on Saturday after the football game or whatever. And you all know you serve on the same board and you like each other and you talk about your family, talk about the game, talk about the weather. All that's totally fine. But right here, this statute, section 286.011, all meetings of any board or commission, of any state agency or authority, of any agency or authority, of any county, municipal corporation, that's a city, political subdivision is a city, except as otherwise provided, meaning there could be some exceptions, at which official acts are to be taken are declared to be public meetings open to the public at all times. No resolution, rule, formal action shall be considered binding except as taken or made at such a meeting. So everything official act that you do as a board member has to be done at a public meeting. Remember, government in the sunshine. That's why they call it that. What constitutes a meeting? It's right there in the middle, bold, underline. An occasion where two or more members of the same board are present. Includes presence physically, could be by telephone, or even when conferring by written documents. And that's old-fashioned, sending letters back and forth. Nowadays we have Zoom, FaceTime, all of that. All of that is, you could potentially run afoul of government and sunshine law if you are talking about planning and zoning board business through any kind of communications, any kind of communication means. And when I say planning and zoning board business, what we're talking about here is discussion ensues, if discussion ensues on a matter which foreseeable action will be taken. Maybe it doesn't even have to be on the agenda, but you might know that something's coming before you, You know, something's been in the newspaper. You read something, you see something, you hear something that you know, this is probably going to come up before the Planning and Zoning Board. Don't talk about it with your other Planning and Zoning Board members outside of a public meeting. Requirements for a public meeting, we've got some bullet points in there, the location, where they are, notice is always very important. There has to be advance notice. The whole idea of notice is so that the public knows, hey, our government is meeting and the government is going to make decisions. We got it. We have a right to know the government's meeting. So that's why notice is there. And
When
yep.
we've had some situations over the last couple of years where notice has been interrupted. If public notice signs that are put up on a property are taken down prior to the meeting, not by a city official, not by a property owner, but just, you know, let's say kids did it and threw those signs in the lake, is that no longer properly noticed?
That's a good question. I don't know the exact answer for
Because
it.
there's been 2 or 3 times in recent memory where I've been making my drive around the neighborhood, looking at what's going to be coming up on the agenda that I was sent, and noticed that there's no public notice sign on this parcel.
Right. And you're talking about a notice of land use action, where there's a yard, like a
Yeah.
yard sign or small sign. Where,
I think the top of ours just says
Right.
public notice, but yeah,
Right.
something like that.
well, in addition to those physical signs on the property where action is going to be taken, there's supposed to be a public advertisement.
There is.
And so you'd have to look at the code to see if there was any kind of specific notice requirement for additional above and beyond notice, like what you're talking about, where signs are placed on the property, and that's in the code.
So you have a recommendation on where the sign is put in the property? Like, you can't put it in a bush?
I think the
So it's
code,
all one of those.
We see those all the time.
Bush, I'm like,
I think the code probably says, I don't have it with me, but I think it probably says, you know, on the perimeter, visible, you know, highly
Yeah.
visible place.
and it's kind of like, okay, I can't read that.
But you know, those kinds of, if, you know, and it's up to, it's usually up to the petitioner to make sure those signs are in the right place. They ought to be consulting with city staff to make sure they're done right.
It's the petitioner who maybe removed them.
Yeah.
Putting them in the bush.
They don't,
Well,
but
the danger that they're running into is that they're giving someone who might be opposed to what they're doing an opportunity to come in to you and say, hey, I don't think notice has been properly posted for this. I don't think the board can do anything on this tonight because I don't think.
In our capacity, if we go out to inspect the proposed undertaking that the petition seeks to achieve, if we notice that the property is not posted, we have an obligation to forward that along to the Director of Growth Management and say, whoa, go put another sign on it now.
Yes, you should, because basically,
that's what I
the
do.
procedure is when we post a sign, we should take a photo of that sign to show that the sign was posted with a date stamp. That shows that it was posted on this date.
Where it was posted, maybe?
Yeah, well, it shows where it was
Location-wise?
posted in the photo.
Yeah.
Okay, photo's worth 1,000 words, right?
Right.
But it should be in a place on the perimeter of the property. It should be in a highly visible location. The whole thing is to give public notice. So, you know, you don't hide it in the bush, you don't hide it behind the tree, you know, those kind of
Right.
things. So we do that, we take a picture, the photo shows that. It also shows that it was posted, but if you're traveling down there a day or two later and the sign is missing, if you call us, we'll go repost it.
The last contentious item we had on the agenda, the signs disappeared. I didn't even know it was on the agenda until I got my agenda packet.
Yeah.
And then I wrote the property and I went, whoa, where are the signs?
But
And I
we,
did call and y'all came back up and put the
yeah,
signs.
we will repost if necessary.
And that's a, you know, case by case situation that you all, as it comes up, you'll have to decide what to do, and maybe out of, you know, it happens once, maybe out of, you know, the interest of being extra cautious, you know, delaying the matter for making sure signage is out there and it's documented that it's out there. So, all right, let's keep going here. Public comment, we've gone over this. Public gets a reasonable opportunity to be heard. A lot of local governments limit public comment to 3 minutes. That's one of the toughest jobs for the chair, is to figure out how to stop people when their time is up. And a lot of chairs I hear, explain that it's not fair to everybody else. They're eating up the time of everybody else who wants to come up and make a comment. I think that's pretty fair and effective. People understand that. Voting, each of you must vote in a contentious matter. You don't get to abstain. You have to vote one way or the other. Unless, of course,
Recusal.
you decide that you have some kind of conflict of interest and you decide to recuse yourself or disqualify yourself. Disqualify is the word that's used in the code, but it means the same thing as recusing yourself from making a vote. Effective sunshine law violations. There are criminal and civil ramifications if you were to violate the sunshine law. If you, in the worst type case scenario, would be, and there are examples that I can share with you where elected people are making deals behind the scenes somewhere outside the sunshine and making decisions, and then they go up at a public meeting and vote a certain way or get something done, conducting business completely outside the sunshine law. We all know, in America, that's not how government's supposed to be, and it's basically corrupt. So it is corrupt, and so that's why if people act outside the sunshine law and conduct business outside of public meetings, they get in trouble for it.
Is the sunshine law just for our state, or is that
Well, every state has its own state law similar to this, but in Florida we call it government in the sunshine law because we're the sunshine state.
Okay.
But we actually have one of the more robust set of laws regarding public accountability of elected and appointed board members.
okay.
And it can be very strict. And I know none of you all are going to run into any trouble because not only are we talking about it, but because you all are good people and to avoid things that could potentially get you into hot water by trying to talk about things with somebody outside the sunshine.
Yeah.
There could be, in addition to criminal sanctions, it's possible that there could be civil sanctions where you could be potentially sued personally for something if you were to run afoul of that, the government and the sunshine law. And there's, if you all want, and I can provide a link to Government and the Sunshine Law Manual, which is it is an in-depth discussion.
You don't want that. Follow these simple rules. These are easy.
This is right, and I have I'm a lawyer, so I do have my disclaimer at the end that this packet isn't intended to cover everything. It's an orientation. So in addition to Government and the Sunshine Law, which is about conducting business at public meetings, we have the Public Records Law. So what's a public record? This document that I put together and emailed to the city manager, by virtue of me emailing that to the city manager, this becomes a public record. And so here's a definition, a quick definition at the top of the page. The Public Records Law defines what a public record is and gives examples: documents, papers, letters, maps, books, tapes, photographs, films, sound recordings, just about anything, unless there's some special exception. It does also include computerized records and email. So email, texting, if you are conducting any kind of business, talking about planning and zoning board agenda items, you as a planning and zoning board member, if you're emailing, using your personal email or your own personal text, you could potentially create a situation, probably so, where your email is public record. Maybe nobody knows about it, but what if, somebody, you're up here and you're texting away and everybody sees it and you're maybe making comments on your Facebook page. This has happened in city commissions. Commissioners texting or, writing on their Facebook page.
That's not intelligent.
Well, what that does is see it. And what that does is it makes your Facebook page all of a sudden subject to being in the realm of public records.
That's the reason we now have email.
That is the reason why I'm going to provide all of you, they're working on it. They've almost got them done, I believe.
It's already done.
Okay, but we'll be providing all of you with City of Lake City emails for your capacity as planning and zoning board.
Fantastic.
Any official business in your role as members of the planning and zoning board, we would request that you use your city provided email. By doing that, just so that fair transparency disclaimer, when you use that, we have access to it. So if anyone were to come and file a sunshine law, say, I want all communication by the members of the planning and zoning board, emails, et cetera, they can go in and pull that out of the server and say, there were 3, there were none, there were that. It saves you, if you use your private email for city business, then you have to provide that. And I'm sure that you don't want to be providing access to your private email accounts. So this way we're fixing that so that you have a city account and, the only thing you use that for is your planning and zoning business. So if you send emails, they can be provided. If you don't send emails, there's no information about it.
Yeah.
Will that be the primary account where we get noticed of upcoming meetings?
Yes, we will, once we get those issued to you, then we will have a listing of those and we'll put together an email list so that when you get your agenda, when you get your package, when you get anything from the city, it will go to your city email.
Does it operate in an Outlook environment?
I will, if it's all right, after this, your workshop here, I can bring it up on the screen here and I can show you guys how to work it.
Sweet.
There you go. So that way you have an official method of communicating with city staff about matters that are coming up on an agenda. And you are free to communicate that way with city staff, and it's there for everybody to see. Remember, it's the public can say, I want to see the chair's emails about, I know she was emailing about something. I want to see her emails on this agenda item. And she'll say, all right, there they are. And, really there's nothing, best practices, there's the requirements of the law, but there's also best practices. And if you are open and showing your thoughts and, using your email properly to ask questions of staff, it's there for everybody to see. And there's nothing nefarious going on. And these days, don't trust government very much. That's, it's an important thing for them to be able to see transparency working. So also, what else about public records? Let's see. Like I said, just about anything that's submitted into the public record becomes a public record. Photographs, documents. If a petitioner submits something into the public record as part of their application for approval, that becomes part of the public record. Even if you were to write, you were writing up a memo or something and you put draft on it, you didn't really intend for it to be officially out there yet, even though you went ahead and did that on your city email, that becomes public record. And there are some exemptions from disclosure, but your city attorney is going to review those to figure out if something should be excluded from the public record or not, such as someone's social security number, a bank account, things like that, medical records. But that's probably not going to happen to the Planning and Zoning Board, but those are types of exceptions from the Public Records Act. What you need to know is, the context of where this might happen would be if someone is asking, I want to see P&Z member so-and-so's emails from their public email and from, the last year. And you need to make sure, if it's a city email, the city will have control over that. And they'll probably let you know it's happening, but they'll be able to go into the archive and get all of it.
Kind of like at the federal level, when you're subject to a FOIA request, you'll get
Right.
notification from the custodian.
It's exactly the same. And maybe, there might be a request for any emails from your own private email. If somebody's phishing or just trying to grab out there to see maybe if you communicate in some other way. You won't, because you know not to do that. But if someone was to do that, you'd have to turn it over. And if failure to turn over a public record allows the person requesting the public record to go to an attorney and sue the city for failure to disclose public record information, and the city, if they lose, they have to pay attorney's fees. So if you happen to be in possession of a public record somehow and it's being requested from you, turn it over.
And their retention schedules, everything, some of it forever and ever.
Okay, let's get to, there's more detail in there about public information. Beware of social media problems. I just mentioned to you that Facebook snafu. There's the real life example of exactly how that happened. You can read that later. The commissioner turned her Facebook page basically into a public forum. And so she was blocking people from being able to comment. So
Can we go back to page 14 for a moment?
Sure.
Before we move into the real world examples. Third section down that starts off with the all capitalized word note. If you receive correspondence documents at home dealing with city matters, take it to the appropriate city office. What happens, and I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when, because this happens very regularly for those of us that have been on the board for a significant length of time. What is the appropriate way to handle when a member of the public approaches us in the supermarket or while walking down the street during one of the craft festivals in the park and wants to just chew our ear about how this upcoming project is a bad idea?
great question.
Is that what that city email is for? Do we need to immediately go ahead and write up a description of our interaction with that member of the public and forward it through city channels that way?
You don't need to do that. You don't need to go to that extent. You could if you wanted to, but the law doesn't require
It's a
that.
small town, and trust me, angry
Right.
members of the public love chewing my ear. This is too.
I have personal experience in this.
It's scaring me, man.
So
Oh no, develop some thick ear skin. You're gonna.
what you're getting into is what we call ex parte communication. And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. I'm going to get to it. But ex parte communication is when you have a communication with somebody who's not a member of the board, member of the public who has specific concern, or an aggrieved person there who
Concern is putting it politely.
Sure. They want to influence you. They know you're an important person in the community. You're on the Planning and Zoning Board. They want to influence you, try to get you to vote in a certain way. And it's okay to listen to them. But when the agenda item comes up, if you've had any kind of ex parte communication with somebody, it should be disclosed on the record. It should say, I just need to disclose at the beginning of the meeting that I did have a conversation with so-and-so about this You don't need to go into the vast details, but just let them know, you
So
know.
I need to put their name on record.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so because people have a right to know.
Madam Chair, during the last 2 weeks, Jim so-and-so chewed my ear at the supermarket. Bob so-and-so chewed my ear at Shirley's restaurant. So-and-so read me the riot act in the middle of a lusty park. Please
Yes,
enter that into the record.
Just, I have had conversations with Joe, Bob, and Billy Bob, you know.
Right, but you need to,
But I need to put their legal names on the record as those individuals approached me.
yeah, but you explained that, you know,
I didn't promise
Listen-
them anything. I
listen-
just sat there and
yeah,
listened
listen
and
to-
nodded and smiled politely.
as a member of a board in the public, you're gonna be approached, you're gonna be, quote, lobbied. But, you know, people who are professional lobbyists who are being paid by a client to lobby the board are supposed to register as lobbyists with the city so that you know it's not just a member of the public, it's a person being paid to try to influence you. And you absolutely, in that kind of a situation, need to report that.
So we can ask them if they registered as lobbyists?
Yeah. Well, you probably, a registered lobbyist is supposed to tell you ahead of time.
I don't think lobbyists hang out at Shirley's.
But what we're really talking about is members of the general public who are aware of something that's coming up and they want to talk to you about it. It happens with every city council member on everything. And not everything is, quote, an ex parte communication in a quasi-judicial sense. People have a right to talk to their elected and appointed officials, right? And wherever they are. It's when you're in a quasi-judicial setting, a quasi-judicial proceeding, where you're acting in a role as a planning and zoning board member, and you're going to make a decision that has a legal ramification on someone's property rights. That's why you should disclose that ex parte communication from Joe or Bob, who has a clear interest in the outcome and is trying to influence you in the outcome. Does that make sense?
So put it on the record, call them out by name on the YouTube, so it goes out to every member of the city. And say, this individual spoke to me and tried to change my opinion this way. This person spoke to me on this date, and tried to change my opinion this way.
But if it's a general policy matter, you know, like the city should have more bus stops. It's okay to, and it's not something where it's a quasi-judicial.
No, and they chew our ear, it's much more pointed than the city
Right.
needs more bus stops.
Right. And, you know, the point is that you disclose it, but you know, you can tell the person when it's happening in the moment, you know, best practice, hey, Joe, Bob, Mary, Sue, I'm sorry, I'm on the planning and zoning board. I can only, you know, you're welcome to come to the meeting, tell me this there. I'd rather just not, you know, this is going to come up where a petitioner is asking for the planning and zoning board to make a zoning change, ask for a variance, ask for a special exception. I feel very uncomfortable about this situation. Just come talk to the planning and zoning board on the record. If you don't, I'm going to have to disclose that you were talking to me about this, and you know, I can't promise anything. I have to hear what staff says. I have to hear what the petitioner says. My mind's not made up one way or the other. I have to wait until everybody has an opportunity to give their presentation and be heard. That's what you have to tell the person when they start chewing your ear off.
Tell them you're violating the sunshine law.
Yeah.
You're gonna have them arrested.
No threats.
You registered lobbyists?
Yeah, are you ready?
So anyway, let's get into procedures for quasi-judicial proceedings and hearings. Now, like I said, this is when you're in the planning and zoning board and a petitioner or a application comes before you to change the zoning of a piece of property from, say, agriculture to residential, so that they can build houses on a piece of property, right? Say it's a 5-acre piece of property. They want the zoning changed so they can increase the density. So that's a kind of a quasi-judicial hearing, because your decision could affect their legal rights to the property. So this I actually took this from the Alachua County Commission's procedures, this is a statement that their county attorney reads before every quasi-judicial proceeding. And I think it's very effective because it lets everybody know that everyone who wishes to present or testify, whether you're a petitioner, whether you're an affected party, you have to be, whether you're staff, you have to be sworn in. There's the clerk will swear a person in.
The chair can't do that?
No, the chair should not do that. The clerk should do it. And they swear a person in.
So Audrey's gonna start showing up at our meetings?
Well, if you don't have a clerk at the meetings, then it can be the chair, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just assuming that you always have an assistant city clerk.
Small town dude.
So that's where you find out everybody who's in the meeting, the proceeding, by finding out who's going to testify, who's going to present, have them be sworn in so that they're giving testimony under oath, and everyone, staff makes their presentation, petitioner makes their presentation.
Or vice versa.
And questions are asked, opportunity for public comment. Is there an aggrieved party or someone who has a special interest in the outcome in a different way? And so it's like a miniature trial where in fact if a petitioner who's asking for the zoning change, they're done, they sit down, and then someone who comes up and challenges or is opposed to what they're doing says other things, and they try to bring up an expert about environmental issues, or they could bring, if you permit it, a aggrieved party could say, I need to be able to put on my evidence of why we think this should not be approved, and we have an expert witness here who wants to explain to the Planning and Zoning Board, they're a zoologist, ecologist, whatever. And they provided a report, and here's a report for the clerk to place into the record for your consideration. They should have done it ahead of the meeting so you can read it ahead of the meeting. But anyway, so the petitioner would have a right to cross-examine that expert and say, the petitioner would say, Madam Chair, may I have an opportunity to cross-examine that interested party's witness who just made these statements, because I think I have a right to rebut some of the things that they said. We haven't done our own environmental impact statement.
Fortunately, we've never gotten that far out in the weeds.
Good. Well, it can get that complicated, but the point is, for quasi-judicial proceedings, it's a meeting within a meeting. So you have your regular planning and zoning board meeting, and you go through your agenda items, your consent items, done. You go through your non-controversial items, move on, and then you've got your quasi-judicial item where you've got people here who are going to talk, and you figure out who's going to speak, who's going to do what. You probably would know that ahead of time because people have filed things with the clerk, so you can see their positions, and then you can swear them in, and then let staff go first, or let petitioner go first, staff goes, and then your other interested parties.
So if we had a quasi meeting, would the staff then be able to say what the law is about that particular thing, because it's a meeting inside a meeting?
Yes.
Would we request, okay, we need information from the staff?
Yes. And staff should still give you a recommendation on that, on whatever quasi-judicial matter is before you.
So you guys have never had a quasi-judicial matter come up?
We've had plenty of them, just small and not to the point where cross-examination is taking place. But, oftentimes, even if there's only 4 people sitting out there, there may be one, proponent of a petition that comes up based on the nature of the petition, whether it's a Something that leads off with the letter Z, or something that leads off with, an SPR, or something that leads off with some of the other nomenclature that you're going to learn as you get into this. Once the chair swears that individual in, even if there's no one else to speak for or against, it's still a miniature quasi-judicial proceeding.
That's right.
Now, what gets really hairy, hopefully this next variant of COVID isn't going to throw us back into the digital meetings, but the rules and regs that, back when I was chair, that Fred Coberline had to go over with me in terms of how to be able to hold a quasi-judicial hearing via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Holy cow, there was all sorts of extra statements you had to read, and all sorts of, do you waive the right to this? Do you waive the right to that? So let's hope we keep meeting in this room for the foreseeable future, because if we go to digital, man, these meetings take on a whole new character.
Yeah. And we won't worry about that tonight, but hopefully we don't have to go on that. But in this page of procedures for quasi-judicial hearings, I do want to point out to you real quick, the term competent substantial evidence. It's right there in the middle paragraph. And that, this refers to county commission. Like I told you, I borrowed this from the public record of Alachua County, which is, I think they do a really good job explaining quasi-judicial hearings. But it says competent substantial evidence is such evidence as a reasonable mind would accept as adequate to support a conclusion. So whenever there's a quasi-judicial matter before you, that is your standard of evidence for making decisions. Is what's being presented to you competent substantial evidence? So is what the staff telling you and showing you about why their recommendation is what it is? Is it competent substantial evidence? Is the petitioner coming to you and is their articulation of why you should do what they're asking for? Are they providing you competent substantial evidence to support your conclusion? Same with interested parties or aggrieved parties. Competent substantial evidence, it's really a low standard of evidence. In criminal law, you have beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest. And in civil, you have by a preponderance of the evidence, which is often described as a little more than the scales of justice swing one way. But competent substantial evidence is it evidence a reasonable mind would accept as adequate to support? It's good enough. So that's your standard. So whenever you're like, I've got questions in my mind about what I'm being told or what I'm seeing or what I'm reading, but is it competent substantial evidence? Yeah, it's competent substantial evidence. Okay, I can make a decision on it. Now, once you make your decision and you vote, the board itself, if it's let's say the majority vote is 4-3. Someone who's voting in the majority needs to articulate the reasons for the decision. Needs to state, well, we heard from staff that what's being requested complies with the code, it meets the code. Everything that we're seeing shows that there's nothing legally incorrect about it. So, the fence is in the right place, within the setback. That what they're asking for is not outside of the restrictions of the code or the historic preservation guidelines, or whatever. So, yeah, everything that's been presented to us shows that it meets the code, and we can approve it. So, you have to have what we call findings of fact. So, why did you vote that way? The board has to always put on the record. It can be pretty simple, but there needs to be, why did the board vote that way? And that's usually,
Is that only for a split decision?
it should be for every decision,
Okay. So
It
we
should
need to
be-
read into the record a statement of
it's
how we
When you-
came to our
if
determination.
you're making a motion, say you're making the motion, that's the where it really comes, is when you're making the motion to approve something or deny something. If you're the one making the motion, you say, I've listened to city staff and I see that city staff says that based on what's been filed with city staff as terms of the stormwater design and the site development review is, we've seen the plans that show that everything's within the setbacks, that they're meeting the water retention engineering requirements in our code, and you go through the list as to all the things, enough things that you think, yeah, this is why I'm going to approve this. You create your factual basis. Why am I making this motion? Because it meets the code under these things. Same reverse if you are making a motion to deny something. It may be more important explain why you're going to vote to make a motion to, why you're going to make a motion to deny something, because that's when you're potentially going to get challenged. So, well, I'm making a motion to deny this petition for the following reasons. We've heard that, staff says that the parking lot spaces are too many, and it's too many for what the code allows for this building space. It far exceeds, and it's going to lead to traffic problems and safety issues, and therefore, based on that information that we've been presented, I'm going to vote to deny this. You can be diplomatic and say, however, be happy to entertain another petition if it comes back. Now, there's provisions in the Land Development Code that say if something gets denied, that the petitioner can't come back for a year or some time frame. But that's where things are going to get worked out with city staff ahead of time. Like that kind of example is kind of a silly example, but like city staff is going to say,
well, they always have the option to go directly to city council to get one of our rulings. So
they can appeal, right? And that's in the code, and that's in the material that I provided when you read through it. Like, if on a quasi-judicial matter, if you disapprove something or you reject something, the petitioner who thinks that you made a legal error can appeal to the city council if they do it within 30 days. And that's why there would be a court reporter there at a quasi-judicial meeting, so that there's a record in addition to the town council is going to watch your meeting. And that's because it's part of the record. But if the town council votes the same way you did and they're legally wrong, the petitioner is going to keep on appealing, and they could appeal all the way up to the circuit court after the town council. So what you do here in quasi-judicial meetings could end up one day being appealed all the way up to a circuit court. I mean, the big land use cases in the state of Florida have gone all the way to the Florida Supreme Court, all starting from Planning and Zoning Board.
Probably in larger cities like Miami.
Yeah, Brevard County. The Snyder case is amazing. In your packet, there's some court cases involving ex parte communication that helps explain your question, Mr. Vice Chair. There's a case in Dade County, speaking of Miami. Communication was between a county commission and one of the parties to a quasi-judicial proceeding pending before the county commission. The court held that such ex parte communication gives rise to a presumption that such contact was prejudicial to the other side and could lead to an invalidation of the ultimate county commission action. So that's where even if you're not persuaded by somebody bending your ear, it's still ex parte communication, and it's up to.
And we just call them right out on the floor and put it into the record.
Yeah, I mean that is your defense. Because if you don't do it and somebody else sees so and so chewing your ear off, and they are an interested party, they're going to come in and say, "Well, I saw so and so chewing Vice Chair's ear off, and I don't know. He hasn't said anything about that, and I don't know what was said, and I don't know if his mind is swayed one way or the other." So that's why ex parte communication is supposed to be disclosed. And if it's to a degree that you decide, I think I need to recuse myself, then you would say that. But at least that way you're on the record doing the right thing, and following the rules.
Well, knowing that we have the ability to actually call some of these individuals out that are bending our ear, I think it'll make it a lot easier knowing that I can just tell them next time I'm walking the aisles at Publix and someone wants to start chatting at me, sir or madam, you realize you're on the record right now and your name will be entered into the minutes of our next meeting.
Well, they're not.
They probably shut them up pretty
They
quick.
must be awfully more forthcoming with you than they are with me.
Now, they're not technically on the record in the grocery store.
They're about to be on record because I'm gonna mention their name into the record.
But what I'm telling you is, big part of your role as planning and zoning board members is educating the public. And that you have to educate the public about how the planning and zoning board of business works. And if they're going to try to bend your ear at the grocery store, you need to be able to explain to them, look, first of all, I appreciate you telling me about what you think. I value what you think, but this is public business. Let's do it at the meeting. The meeting's going to be on such and such date. I'll see you there, and you can tell me there. Otherwise, you're going to put yourself in a weird position of standing there listening to them, and you don't know what they're going to end up saying. And then, you're going to have to say, the longer you sit there and engage with the person, the more you're engaging in an ex parte communication. So my suggestion to you is, as soon as you
Just let them
realize,
know, you're on the record for all intents and purposes.
I tell them, I have not seen any of the documentation yet. I know it's coming up on the agenda, but I don't know when. There are all kinds of things we have to go through. So I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
You need to call regional planning because they have to come up with stuff for us. But I have not enough information to discuss it.
Or you could just simply say, while I would appreciate your input, I'm not at liberty to discuss this because it will be coming in front of the planning and zoning council.
Right.
Okay, so,
you can do that.
it would be better if you come to the meeting and present there, or if you have a few comments you want to say, but I can't comment back on anything. But, basically, because if so, we get into ex parte communication. You can kind of deflect them off that, as much as I'd like to talk to you about this, I can't because it's coming up in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission and I have to vote on it.
That's right. Okay, so it's 2 hours. The last pages in here are on voting conflicts. Read over that when you have a chance.
I think we've covered that pretty well.
Yeah, I think we did.
On the previous page, I did notice, voting on quasi-judicial matters. 5 lines from the bottom, your vote should never be based on arbitrary or capricious reasons or based on your own subjective reasoning as to what seems to make the most sense in a particular matter. As this relates to current trends in planning and zoning theory, I'm kind of a student of this. I read some books and I look at a lot of stuff on some websites about good policy and in planning and zoning. How limited exclusively by what is in the LDRs are we? If there is something that technically meets mustard in the LDRs, but in terms of the modern ethos of where both theoretically and academically planning and zoning is going in terms of best recognized practices, et cetera, are we allowed to temper our decisions with what is best practice as opposed to does it barely meet the minimum of what's in the LDRs?
Every decision you make should be based on the city's code and the comprehensive plan and what has been adopted by the town council.
And those give us some latitude.
That's and where if you've been delegated discretion on some issues, then you have that delegated authority. Otherwise, go back to the beginning description of the role of the planning and zoning board and that code, powers and duties. That's the box you live in.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to say, I'm reading an article from the American Planning Association about this topic, and they recommend that cities start doing this, but it's not approved it's not adopted in the city code, and you impose other restrictions that are best management practices on someone that's not in the code, you're creating a situation where you could be appealed pretty quick on that. So you stick to what's been adopted by the city of Lake City in the code, in the LDRs, in the comprehensive plan, and then you're safe.
What's LDR stand for?
Land development regulations.
That's what we go by.
Do we have the 8th member yet? Have they appointed the 8th member?
No, we're going to additional applications. Get the,
The school board representative?
I'll work on
Because the one that we,
Yeah.
that may be a problem, we really don't need that.
Okay. We're going to need a representative
Right.
board for the currency thing, because anything that we do has to be reviewed by them because they have input because of school plan.
Yeah, if it makes substantial differences.
Yes.
And that's a different topic, the concurrency with the comprehensive plan and consistency with the comprehensive plan. It's a whole other issue.
So
So,
what I would say, I think the board has really enjoyed your presentation thus far tonight.
Yes.
It's been very
Thank
informative.
you. Thank you.
And would you like to schedule some more sessions periodically?
How often will he be attending our meetings?
Well,
Better question. How are we paid?
do what?
Do you have a contract with the city?
Yes, he does.
Are you on retainer or by the hour?
it will be by the hour.
Ooh.
Basically, what I would suggest is that we bring him back every 2 or 3 months this year.
Every 3 months would be great, and we,
Or if he's of course, if he's available, we'll schedule with him and you with your schedules.
and we could come up with specific topics,
Training.
so we could control the time a little bit better for you.
Sure.
That work?
That'll be excellent, and my tenure is over in February. Word,
Your chair.
and as chair on the board also.
Well, they better re-up you.
Well,
You've got a lot of training in you.
Yeah, I think that we can manage that. But anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
Did you?
I think I'm done unless anybody has any other burning questions.
No, we'd love to have you sit in quarterly and participate in some of our workshop discussions that take place at the end of each one of our agendas.
yeah, it might help for you to sit through a couple of meetings with us. Or just
Sure.
one meeting with
I
us.
sit through all kinds of public meetings.
Are you from the duck pond, by the way? You said your house in a historic area.
No, I'm not. That was just a hypothetical.
Oh, okay. Well, I was gonna say, oh, we're in the duck pond, are you?
So with that, we will thank Byron. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate everything, and thank you for the wonderful handouts, and we'll get back with you to schedule the next follow-up session, and then of course we have progressive planning.
Sure, yeah, thank you very much.
And then for our board, let me just say that for our new members, thank you for applying and being your willingness to serve. You're doing a great service to your community. Okay, this is sometimes a hard and thankless job, but you were carefully vetted and recommended and known to be people of good standing within the community. So we look forward to great things for you.
Go through and
Follow
introduce
the
ourselves.
rules. Yeah, we'll do that in just a moment. And then for our long-serving members, we thank you for your continued service. So with that, the city owes you a debt of gratitude. So at this point, we'll start at this end, and if you would introduce yourself.
Davis, Georgianis. I answer to a pause in the conversation. With a name like mine, nobody knows how to pronounce it. And I'm retired. This is fun.
My name's Christopher Leidick. I'm the United States District Archaeologist and Historian for the Osceola National Forest. I pretty much eat, breathe, and sleep historic preservation law, which is why I was invited to sit on this board.
Awesome.
Served as chair for 2 terms, but have been on the board for about 11 years now.
Wow, that's awesome.
Larry Nelson, I'm a retired Army officer and retired from Federal Civil Service, where I was a personnel security specialist. And I've been on a few boards before, but not at the city level.
Well, we thank you, sir.
That's awesome. I'm Greg Cooper, and I'm a business owner. So I run a construction company. And anything else?
Do you do historic?
I love historic, and it's part of my desire is to you know, I just like the architecture of historic.
We'll give Chris a megaphone and you can ride behind him in your car and talk up to you by the megaphone.
You would probably know the house I bought, the old Daughtery house.
The old which one?
Daughtery,
Which intersection?
it's across from DOT. It's a 4-story brick.
Oh my God. yes,
Oh,
I love
okay.
that house.
Uh,
Did you
that,
just paint that?
the old Darby one.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
That was actually.
So if I can interrupt for just a moment. One administrative announcement, and that is you have a regularly scheduled planning and zoning meeting on December 7th. Look forward to seeing you all there. With that, are you adjourned?
We're adjourned.
Okay.
I didn't know we were ever actually.
You weren't, but we're ending the meeting, so everybody feel free.
I need to know when to stop.